Hi everybody! Have you ever wondered what it would take to put a used GM 14-bolt axle into, say, a Suburban or another vehicle that doesn't have one? Well, if so, you're in the right place, because we just did it and we're going to talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. So I feel the need to preface this video with a bit of an explanation. This project did not go according to plan, and because of that, the filming got a bit disjointed. So I'm going to do a little bit of a different kind of video than my normal and try to voice over on some scenes so that you can get both B-roll and see what's happening, as well as an explanation. Because if you stick around, there are quite a number of things that we learned doing this that is useful information if you're going to do this yourself. So I want to make sure to get you the information that we found useful in this video, as well as be somewhat entertaining. So that being said, let's get on to the meat and potatoes. Alright, so today's adventure, I'm actually out here at my dad's place in Pennsylvania where, you know, he has a shop because, God forbid, we have a shop in Jersey. Anyhow, so out here at my dad's place, today's project involves a new axle for Project MONSTERBURB. Why the axle? Well, what we have here is you can say hi to JJ too.
Hi everybody.
What we have here is a GM 14-bolt, 10.5 inch. It's 2005, so late model. Let me get my hand because, you know, God forbid I know how to use a camera. It comes with the G80 locker, so that's a positive considering the existing axle on the Suburban has no locking. And it's a significantly heavier, dutier axle. So by the time our end goals of 40-inch tires is easily handled by this here 14-inch. May end up gusseting and that kind of stuff till then, but it's good. It's a solid platform to build on. Things we're learning right now, I'm replacing dust shields. And it turns out dust shields are significantly more involved. All right, so one of the first lessons that we learned buying a used axle and going over all of it is that most of the stuff that you're going to get off a said used axle is probably going to be rusted to hell. The dust shields on this thing are practically gone, practically non-existent. And the dust shield's a little bit important. The dust shield serves as the backing plate for the parking brake shoes. So in the event the dust shield does not hold the parking brake shoes, you risk the shoes locking into the rotors and ending up with problems. Not to mention the axle seal is also behind there, or the wheel seal as they put it, is also behind there. You don't really want to risk that having problems. Since the backing plate is the last thing that comes off of this entire assembly, well, you just got to start from the beginning. So go ahead and start removing those bolts that hold the axle to the hub itself. Once you have those bolts removed, then you can actually, since this is a full floating assembly, you can actually just pull the axle out. It will slide right out of the carrier assembly inside. Just like that. Now a little bit of oil will come out. You can't avoid that. It's okay. So just remove the axle tube and be careful not to bang the end of it where the splines are. At this point, we have to remove the flat retainer. I'm going to call it a retainer washer or spring that holds the key in. So once that retainer washer or spring is removed, and it's very easy, then you can actually remove the key that holds the spindle nut right there in my hand. So from here, it's actually pretty easy. Now I have the socket that you're supposed to use to mess with the spindle nuts, but you can even just use the pick. They're not hard, just turn that spindle nut all the way out. Now that the spindle nut is out, we can work on removing the hub assembly itself. Now, I decided to leave this in the video to demonstrate that it can be a little sticky. The axle seal that's in the back tends to hang up. In fact, you never ever want to do this without a new axle seal. So you can just pry right on the back. It doesn't take a lot of force to just pull it off the spindle just like that. So from here now we can start disassembling the parking brake assembly. I actually prefer to refer this as a parking brake more than an emergency brake, but I guess it serves both purposes. So yeah, now we're going to start removing the parking brake assembly. I guess I should have told my little brother that there's a little bit easier way to do those little retainers, but that's alright, he got them well enough. So you remove those little retainers just like he's doing. You push that flat washer / latching spring, you push it in, and then you can turn the retainer stud and it just comes right out. Just takes a quarter turn and that comes out. Now what those do is they hold the shoe assembly to the backing plate. So once you have those removed, the whole thing actually wiggles pretty easy. Now what we're going to do from here is we're actually going to take that main spring, and if you grab it, I do not endorse using a pair of side cutters to do that, but once you grab that spring, you can actually rotate it out just a little bit and the whole assembly falls right out. Now we're going to remove the shoe, or the lever that actually does the work here. So once that's gone, we're going to remove what's left of the axle / wheel seal. It's an axle seal, but at the parts stores they call it a wheel seal. Here you have to be really careful not to nick the bearing surface, because what's underneath that seal, that right there that we just exposed, that is a bearing surface. That's where the seal rides, so don't put any nicks in that or it will weep. So now we're just going to take the nuts off the backside. If your axle's still in the vehicle, this can be quite tricky to do, and even with it on a bench like this, we still have to use a ratchet to get to at least one of the nuts. But there's 4 of them back there. You just crank them off. They are tight, so leverage is handy, but get them loose and you can just start spinning them off. So at this point, now that they're all loose, just take a ratchet, get it the rest of the way. Really not that big of a deal. It's barely an inconvenience. Here you can just take a little hammer, give it a knock, piece falls right out. Now here I've kind of jumped a little bit ahead and I didn't show, but the dust shield is actually just one piece of this backing assembly, and you'll see that when you take it apart. But I went ahead and cleaned up the surfaces and threw some paint in there. The paint is just to keep the moisture out, not to look pretty. It's just to, you know, prevent a little bit of moisture, at least until the axle gets completely done. So now we're just going to use the drill, and the biggest deal here is to sink those bolts in. You can see how they're pulling in real nice like. And I don't know what the torque spec is. I probably should. But this is one of those things where you just kind of send it home because you are not going to break that stud. That last bolt you're going to have to do by hand. There's honestly no way around it. It's just, unfortunately, that's how it is. The clearance just isn't there. And here we go, sending the rest of them, making sure they're tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw some paint around there again. It's just a little extra protection to keep the whole assembly, you know, from rusting out again. It may only last a year maybe, but hey, every little bit helps, right? It doesn't look pretty, you know. Don't beat me up in the comments here, or, you know, do it if you feel free. So here we're putting the lever actor, the lever back in. The silver part here is anti-seize. So you want to take anti-seize and use it liberally on everything. Anti-seize is a rust inhibitor, as well as making sure things don't seize up in there. It stays in place a lot better than grease does, than just standard grease. So you're much more likely to be able to use this and actuate it. It's not nearly as likely to seize up and rust as quickly. Forgive me for my use of wire strippers. I don't know why. It's a bad habit. I tend to use wire strippers as needle nose pliers. I guess that just is what it is. So here we're putting the main spring back on. Now I'm going to catch it into the other shoe. You'll notice I have the shoe retainer post on the top one, and now I'm just pulling it down around, and we're going to catch the lever into its appropriate little slot, and the spring tension now is holding it while I get the retaining post into the bottom shoe as well. Again, with my improper use of wire strippers, I don't know why it's a habit. I don't know. It just does. I guess because I keep it in my little tool pouch, and it just ends up getting used as pliers. So both retainers are in. Both shoe retainers are in now. Now we're going to take the slack adjuster and stick that in there again with a liberal coating of anti-seize all over it to make sure that that stays loose and moving at all times. And then we're going to take the retaining spring on the other side. I'm going to call that a tension spring, and we're going to stick that in there, you know, again, using the wire strippers like they're not meant to be. Yeah, and I know you're probably going to hate me in the comments because there's probably some anti-seize on those shoes. I honestly don't care. They need to be rebuilt anyhow. All right, now on to our all-time favorite, messiest job. We got to pack those wheel bearings, and this is exactly how you do it. Yes, I know, there's gadgets and stuff, but I mean, come on. Why waste the money, right? Just slobber some of that goo in your hand and get it all in there. You can see there, you could see that the grease got all inside the bearing just like you want it. So at this point, we're going to put the wheel seal in, or the axle seal. All right, now I know there is a special tool used to install these seals so that they're nice and flat and everything, but you know what? I don't have it. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. Just be really delicate with the thing and go very slowly. Be gentle with it, and you can get them in just fine. Now we're going to lube this thing up like it's never been lubed before. That way, during installation, there's no chance of it rolling, and it just goes on as smooth as possible. Alright, so here we have the assembly, and we're going ahead and putting the hub on. I didn't show the greasing of the other bearing in there. You know, I'm not trying to waste all your time. So I'm giving this thing a spin as I put it on. That way I'm doing everything I can not to roll that axle seal or to damage the axle seal in any way. So now I'm going to take that spindle nut. I'm going to turn it on by hand until I can't anymore. And then we're going to use that spindle nut to crank the hub all the way on. So here I actually just went ahead and put the torque wrench on, and we're going to use it. And it takes a little bit. Give it a little spin. Make sure that axle seal goes on there real nice and beautiful like. And you just turn it in till she seats. Alright, now this procedure right here is important. I'll see if I can throw some wording up, but keep in mind that that torque right there needs to be 52 foot-pounds. So you torque that spindle nut to 52 foot-pounds, then you loosen it. So you loosen it up, give it a little bit of a turn. Right, now we got our 52 foot-pounds. Now we're going to loosen that spindle nut. Take it all the way loose. And then what you want to do is you want to turn it back tight by hand. The spec, from what I've seen, is literally 0 to hand tight on that spindle nut. Now you are going to have to wiggle it a little bit, and forgive my dad. He decided that he wanted to see what was happening, so I didn't get to show you the installation of the key and the key retainer, but we did do that. So it does have the key and the key retainer on the spindle nut. Now here, you got to be careful. When you put that axle in there, that last little bit, that will catch you by surprise. I swear, it'll give you a blood blister faster than you could spit 3 times. So here we're just going to send the axle back on with the bolts. I'm sure there's a torque spec that I should have been using. And of course you want to go with the star pattern and divvy out the tightening of the bolts. Just make sure they're all tight by the time it's done. Now we're going to put the drum on. Nice new fresh drums. And then we go on with the calipers. When you get new calipers, it's honestly just as easy to load the calipers, the pads into the calipers, and then stick the whole thing on with just those 2 bolts. But you know, you could do it however you feel like doing it, but this works. And so we're going to stick that on, and we're going to send those bolts home. All right, so last night did not go as nicely as I would have liked it to go, but a couple lessons we learned here. One, if you just got yourself an axle that has probably been sitting around a while, your calipers are probably going to be worthless, as it leaks brake fluid all over my hand. 2 problems that we had with the calipers. For one, when we went to compress the pistons back together, you have to compress the pistons back in when you put new brake pads and everything on. They didn't go all the way in. And then by the time we put enough pressure to get them in, they made a couple popping noises, which indicates that the metal of the pistons has actually swollen and is having a hard time getting past the bore and the square ring. So you don't want to put that on your vehicle, because that's just asking for brake problems. The other problem is the bleeder wouldn't come loose. If I put any more effort into getting that bleeder loose, it probably would break. And without a bleeder, a job like this, you're going to have to do a lot of brake bleeding. So without a bleeder, that's no good. So unfortunately, this morning we had to go and pick up some new calipers, so we have that to throw on. So we're going to start with that. I may not be able to get the axle under the truck today because, you know, it's raining. You'll have that on these big jobs, I guess. That's weather. Weather's weather. But so I may not be able to get the axle actually swapped out today, but we should at least be able to get the axle finished, freshening it up. I'm not going to say rebuild, because we still have the original bearings and all the axle seals, but at least freshened up with new brakes and fluids and stuff. So serviced, I guess. So there's not a whole lot of content on the interwebs about doing this kind of changeover in a Suburban or other vehicles for that matter. I don't know why, but it's just slim pickings out there. So because of that, we went into this not exactly completely blind, but with a different impression than we came out of it with. For one, the spring perches. The spring perches, they'll tell you, are a different dimension. They're supposedly wider on different vehicles than others. I did not find that to be the case. The width of the spring perches matched. So where the springs sit on the standard axle, they also sit the same place on the new axle. So the new axle came out of a 2005 2500 HD Silverado, and this 2500 Suburban, which is also a 2005, I'm sure helps the case, but the springs landed in the same place. So the first complication we ran into were the U-joints. The U-joints in the stock 2500 Suburban are 1350 U-joints, whereas the U-joints in the vehicle that this axle came out of are 1410 U-joints. Now that doesn't really mean a whole lot if you don't know everything about U-joints, so I'll describe it. A 1350 U-joint and a 1410 U-joint have the same diameter bearing cap, but they have different diameters as far as their overall diameter. So a 1410 is a wider universal joint. Now, fortunately, they actually make, and it's not terribly common, so I will put a screenshot up of this U-joint. They make a conversion U-joint that is 1410 on one side and 1350 on the other. This is perfectly fine. The only difference that a 1410 U-joint offers is more of an angular capacity. In other words, it can bend further before it has problems. Well, since you're going in the stock Suburban and you're not changing anything on top of that, then the 1350 is perfectly fine. This may be a problem when I actually start to change the suspension geometry, at which point we'll upgrade the axles, or the drive shafts. So once we upgrade the drive shafts, then we can go with a larger U-joint with more flexibility. But as far as just stock suspension and this axle, 1350 to 1410 U-joint is perfectly fine. The second difference we ran into were the shock absorbers. So the positioning of the shock absorbers on the vehicle that this axle came out of is different. And because of that, the perches for the shock absorbers are at an angle, whereas the shock absorbers on this 2500 Suburban are fairly straight up and down. So the perches for those on the stock axle are pretty much straight up and down. Now, we had to modify the perches to allow the shocks to rest in their appropriate position, and it took a little bit of wiggling. It's not the best, but it is perfectly serviceable. When I redo the suspension and apply this axle the way that I really want to, we will change that so that it is exactly the way it's supposed to be. But for general everyday running, this will be fine. Essentially, we just had to cut a corner out of, maybe I'll try to show that, but we had to cut a corner out of the shock absorber perches on just one side to allow room for the shock absorber to sit in a straight up and down position. And then the bolt gets wiggled up in there in the bushing. So it's perfectly fine. The third item that we ran into in putting this axle underneath this Suburban is that the spring purchase, whilst the same width, what they did change is the height of the spring perches. So the spring perches on the new axle are actually over an inch taller. But what that does mean is that you got to get new U-bolts to mount the axle. So that wasn't really a big deal. You can get the parts from AutoZone, and I'll try to link that if I can. New U-bolts, they're kind of generic. Doesn't really matter. They worked great, but it was a thing that we ran into. So that being said, the three items that you're going to run into dealing with when you're putting a 14 bolt in a 2005 Chevy is the U-joint, which they have a solution for, the spring perches, which you're going to need new U-bolts for, and then the shock absorber mounts, which you can modify to accommodate, but those are the three issues. Other than that, every other issue we ran into was simply just from buying a used axle. We had to replace the dust shields, we had to replace the calipers, we had to replace the discs, and I do want to rebuild the emergency brakes, put new emergency brakes in there because the old ones are kind of crusty, but for now we just reconditioned them and put them back in. The ring and pinion were fine, but it turns out the G80 Govlock, I believe it's worn out, but I can't really get a whole lot of information offline as to the particular circumstance that it's doing. But that being said, even if I were to rebuild it or put a Yukon, this axle is worth putting a differential locker in, whereas the stock axle was not. So I'm totally okay with saving up the money to put a real locker in the back of this axle. So that was it. So hopefully I got the editing decent and this video actually came out interesting or entertaining. Either way, thank you very much for following along. This project was, whilst it was large and it did surprise me with a couple things that I didn't know before, hopefully you guys can watch this video and know what you're getting into ahead of time, making it totally worthwhile and a smooth project, you know, for you to do. I'm very happy that we did this. This thing has turned out very well. No surprises once we got it installed. I'm very happy with it. And it is a great platform to improve the rear axle and rear suspension from here. So overall, project accomplished, and we're really happy with it. So thank you very much for watching along the whole time. Your patronage is very appreciated. Make sure you hit that subscribe and bell icon. You know, it helps out the channel a lot. And, you know, you can get notification for the future projects we got going on with this thing. So thank you very much, everybody. Till next time. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
All right, Kira, what do you think of Daddy's truck so far?
It looks perfect.
Perfect?
Every day it looks perfect.
Every day? Is there anything we could do to make it better? Maybe bigger wheels and tires?
Yeah.
Maybe like a straight axle front end?
Yeah.
Maybe like super four-wheel drive?
Yeah.
What if we make it fly? Yeah?
Yeah, it would be so cool.
What if we make it go faster? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, say.
You can go speeding home.
Oh.